I'm showing you my secrets to speed matching and consisting locomotives using JMRI Decoder Pro on Ron's Trains and Things right now. Hi, I'm Ron of Ron's Trains and Things, and today I'm going to be speed matching a pair of locomotives for consisting on my layout, and I'm going to show you exactly how I go about doing it. Now, speed matching can be a bit of a chore sometimes, but I have developed a process that works for me. Now, this process still takes a little bit of time, it takes a little bit of back and forth, but I get great results from it, so I want to show you exactly how I do it. Now, I want to acknowledge from the outset that there are a number of different ways to go about speed matching. The one I'm going to use today works best for my needs, and it works best for my particular DCC system and the equipment that I use for testing and setting speed. You may have a different process, or you may have heard of other processes that work just as well, and that's fantastic, but I want to show you just how I go about it, and you might pick up some tips that are helpful to you as well. Now, as I get started, there are a few things about my process and about my needs that will be helpful for you to know as we begin. First of all, I'm working with Digitrax non-sound decoders today. We're going to be working in JMRI and working with Decoder Pro, and different manufacturers and different styles of decoders may look a little bit different in Decoder Pro whenever you go to pull them up and to program them, and that's okay, but the basics are going to be the same, and you can use this same process regardless. Now, as I'm working with Decoder Pro today, I'm working with it on my programming track, and my programming track is interfaced with my computer using a Digitrax PR3. Now, today I happen to be working with Digitrax decoders, but the PR3 works with other brands of decoders as well, so you may be able to use the same kind of an interface, if you'd like, to be able to do the speed matching and set the speed tables as well as other CVs and settings on your decoders with the PR3 also. I should, however, say that there are some brands of decoders that prefer to use their own software and their own programmers. I have some ESU Locomotives decoders, for example, and they just don't seem to play real well with Decoder Pro, and so for the sake of those decoders, I purchased an ESU Loc programmer, but for all of my other decoders, I use the PR3 and the programming track. Finally, it's important to note that the locomotives that I speed match on my layout, I speed match to consist together in pairs, and for the most part, they remain in those consists. That being the case, I have some standards that I use to try to get all of my locomotives close to the same settings, but I don't always get all of those locomotives exactly speed matched to one another. The important thing is that they're speed matched within their consist. Now, if I was trading locomotives back and forth from one consist to another, it would be more important that they are more exactly speed matched all the way across my layout. That can be a challenge to do, so I'm happy with keeping locomotives within a particular consist and getting those locomotives within the consist to be as perfectly speed matched as I possibly can. You may notice as we go through the process today that there's a slight bit of variance here and there between the performance of the locomotives, and that little bit can be okay, but you want to get them speed matched very, very closely, and that's going to be our goal for today. Well, hey, if you'd like to see more model railroad tips, tools, and techniques, then you'll want to be sure and subscribe down below. Click the little bell icon so you can catch future videos. But now, let's head on over to the computer and we're going to get started speed matching these locomotives for running in consist on the layout. This video is brought to you by Midwest Model Railroad. Now with 15,000 square feet and one-day shipping, they truly are your one-stop model railroad shop. MidwestModelRR.com, link in the description. When I purchase a new locomotive or install a new decoder, the first thing I do is a basic setup process in Decoder Pro. This includes setting the address to the road number, setting up Rule 17 lighting, and a few other steps. I showed exactly how I do this in a recent video, which I will link in an end screen at the end of this video, so be sure to watch for that. The key step at this point is to read all of the sheets in the decoder using the command button at the bottom of the programming window so that the software knows what the settings are in your decoder. This takes a little bit of time, but it is worth the effort at the beginning of the process. When I plan to consist a locomotive, which is almost always, I make sure to do 3 things in the setup process before I start trying to speed match. First, under the Basic Function tab, I set the acceleration and deceleration rate to 0. This is the momentum of the locomotive, and we can add some momentum back in later, but for the sake of setting the speed tables, it's best to start off with it off. Secondly, under the same tab, I turn off the back EMF. Back EMF is designed to compensate for speed drop that occurs when on a grade or when pulling a heavy load, but when consisting locomotives, back EMF adversely affects the speed of the locomotives that are consisted together, and it tends to leave them fighting one another. The back EMF setting will look different in Decoder Pro for decoders from different manufacturers, but for Digitrax decoders like I'm working with today, it's a simple matter of setting the solo operation droop compensation to 0. The other values above this are not important because they are void when the back EMF is turned off, which is what this setting does. Finally, before trying to speed match, I go to the Speed Table tab and check Use Speed Table Box. Most decoders are set to a 3-point speed table, or a starting voltage, top voltage, and mid voltage type of speed table. You can speed match using 3-point speed control. The process works similarly to what I will do here, and in most cases it works fine. But I prefer to use the 28 speed step table, however, because it gives me a more precise control with each speed step if I need it. Note that the default speed table is a linear table with a setting of 0 at speed step 1 to a top level of 255 at speed step 28. We will be adjusting this to create the speed tables that we want. With these changes made, I write changes to all sheets to make sure that all of the settings are set on the decoder, and I save the settings into the software. Now I'm ready to take the locomotive to the layout and begin the speed setting process. First, I need to determine how the current speed table is functioning. For this, I begin notching up the speed on my throttle 1 step at a time until the locomotive begins to move. At whatever speed step it begins to move, that tells me that the setting of that speed step is where I need to begin setting it for speed step 1. For this locomotive, there is some movement at speed step 4 and consistent movement at step 5. So some value between that of these 2 speed steps is where I need to begin. A scale speedometer is a key tool for my speed matching process. At this point, I test the top speed just to get a starting point. At this point, it is always going to be too fast. Note that the top speed of this locomotive at present is a scale 209 miles per hour. My personal standard for locomotive speed is to have the locomotive begin moving at speed step 1 at or below about 2 miles per hour, and for the maximum speed of the locomotive to be about a scale 90 miles per hour at speed step 28. This top speed allows for some drop in the speed whenever under load or on a grade. Next, I go back to the programming track and adjust the speed table based on my test at the layout. In this case, speed step 4 is currently set to a value of 28 and speed step 5 a value of 37. So I start by raising speed step 1 to 28. I know I want to lower the top speed by more than half, so I begin by pulling speed step 28 from 255 down to a setting of 110. I find a linear speed table works best for me, so when the top and bottom values are set, I click the Match Ends box, and Decoder Pro creates a linear progression between these 2 settings. Then I write the changes on this sheet by clicking the box at the bottom, save the settings into the software, and go test the locomotive again. As you can see here, my settings are close, My bottom end speed is about 1 to 1.5 miles per hour high, and my top end speed is about 4 miles per hour low. This means I need to adjust both ends by 1 or 2 steps up or down and try again. Once I have the first locomotive running according to specs per the speedometer, I follow the same procedure with the second locomotive. You cannot just match the settings from one locomotive to another because different locomotives, even though they may be matching locomotives from the same manufacturer, do not always run the same. The same is true for decoders. It's easier to speed match locos from the same manufacturer and with the same decoder, but you will still need to go through this process with each locomotive. Note here that this second locomotive has the same top setting of 110, but the bottom setting is much higher to get the loco started. When I have both locomotives running according to specs with the speedometer, it's time to do a performance test for consisting. I consist the locomotives together with my DCC system, then test them running at various speeds, uncoupled, an inch or two apart. This way I can see whether one locomotive is running noticeably faster or slower than the other. Some very slight variation back and forth between the two will be okay and is almost impossible to get rid of completely, but they should be able to average a consistent distance apart throughout the speed range. If not, then tweak the settings of one or the other at specific speed steps to compensate. I usually find myself tweaking the settings of one locomotive or the other several times before I'm perfectly happy with the results. When they run consistently together in this test, then I should be done. At this point, if you like some momentum added to your settings, now is the time to do it. I like just a little bit of acceleration and deceleration, just enough to avoid abrupt starts and stops, but not enough that it takes a long time for my trains to stop. I add a setting of 5 to both parameters of both locomotives, test it one more time to see that the starts are pretty much the same, and if so, I'm good to go. I couple the locomotives together, test them coupled together running around the layout, and then they're ready to start pulling trains. So that's the process I use for speed matching my locomotives. Now, I'm not trying to oversimplify this process. It does take some back and forth, some testing and adjusting and testing and adjusting, and sometimes it takes a number of trips back and forth between the programming track and the layout to get a pair of locomotives running the way that I want. The good news is spending that time at the beginning will get you locomotives that run very well together, and you may not have to do any more work on adjusting their operations for a very long time to come. Now, the important thing that I want you to note is that while I'm not trying to oversimplify the process, I also don't want to overcomplicate the process. Speed matching is something that you can do, and it's worth a little bit of time and effort to try to do to get locomotives to run very well together on your layout whenever you're running DCC. Now, as I mentioned earlier in this video, I connect my programming track to my computer using a Digitrax PR3 as an interface. It is a great way to interface with most decoders, and I'm going to include a link to a PR3 in my Amazon Pick of the Week in the description down below. Be sure and check that out, along with my Micromark 10% promo code and the other great links that are in the description down below. And be sure to check out that video on how I set up my new decoders, as well as other great model railroad content in the links on your screen. And join me Tuesdays as I bring you even more great model railroad videos. And I look forward to seeing you then. 10, Lizzie?